Assalamu alaikum. My name is Abu Dhar. I was born in what was called British Guyana at the time, and it's now Guyana, in 1949. My mother was an organist. She didn't manage to get the level of education that her siblings got, being the eldest of the family, and she had to stay home to assist with domestic chores. However, she took piano lessons that took her to the highest level that you could achieve in Guyana at the time, in British Guyana at the time. And her one permanent job was as an organist, which is actually a part-time job at the Christian Catholic Church in Guyana. She took me to the church from an early age. And I don't remember having any problem with being in the environment. In fact, I embraced it. I embraced what I knew about God. I embraced the church. I embraced the congregation. And I felt very comfortable in the church. She took me to prayer meetings on Tuesday nights and Sunday worship, and I went to Sunday school on Sundays. So I was close to religion from the very first moments of my life. The home, however, was not a religious home, I would think. It wasn't anti-religious, but it wasn't a religious home because it was a home that featured parties, music, and one of the other features of the home was the constant stream of people that came into the home. Because of music, they idolize the artists like from America, but those ones that straightened their hair, the family didn't like, right? So I had that was another pressing thing that I grew up with, right? So they had family, I had religion from going to church, and I had the Afrocentricity, and I had the politics. My great-grandmother, she was bedridden and paralyzed on her left side. She was a Catholic. And religion would enter the house when at times she would feel physically or maybe spiritually low, and she would send to call a priest to pray for her and to do his rites. And he would come. But one thing I noticed during that time is that my two uncles would always murmur beneath their breaths because to do it loud for young people, it would be disrespectful to my great-grandmother, about the priest coming to the house and to praying for my grandmother while his system is subjecting the people of our country to colonialism. They didn't think that that was right. And they would say things like, they need to pray for themselves more than to pray for people who are their subjects. So those things kind of had me thinking. And because I was a bright child growing up and excelled in school, from a very early age, I was reading a lot. Our house had a small library, and so, I would read those books. I would read school books. I would read anything I get my hands on, newspapers, anything I got my hands on. And so at an early age, I was becoming self-possessed in a sense, knowing myself, thinking, being introverted and thinking about myself, having inner thoughts and being aware of them. At that time, some of my family members decided to leave Guyana. So my aunt was the first to leave. She went to England. An uncle came to Toronto. He ended up sponsoring my mother, and she sponsored me. Before I left Guyana, there were two incidences, however, that threw me off a bit. Although I was bright and a successful student, after those incidents, I couldn't concentrate in the classroom anymore. I just lost my ability to concentrate in the classroom. And it would remain so until years after. And I would my mother would send me to different schools. I went only to private schools. And she would send me to different schools because there were puzzles as to what was happening with me in school. I would start and be at the top of the class, and by the second term, when I got to know everybody, didn't have an interest in schoolwork. Outside of the classroom, I was reading and learning, and I was a voracious reader, right? So I was learning, and I had a hunger for knowledge, right? I liked to know things. I have a son. I have two of my sons are actually like that. They really read a lot, and and explore their thoughts through different literature, and they just follow me in that way of reading. I came to Canada at 15 years of age, and the problem persisted with me in the classroom. Well, that's what they call it. But it's actually like rape. I have an autobiography. I wrote my autobiography, and I use that word, right? Because I find if you twist the word, sometimes you get lost in what the impact is on the victim, right? And if the person is young, you got to use the right words so people fully understand. Because when a young child tells adults that they've experienced it, a lot of adults are dismissive, and thinks that it doesn't really have long-lasting effects or really any effects, and that's as far as the truth as you can be, right? And I didn't notice that was responsible for my inability to concentrate in the classroom, right, at the time. But as I went through a healing process later in my life, I realized that's where it came from. Because before that, I had no problem in concentrating in the classroom, and it was only there that I had any problems. Outside of that, I was excelling in athletics. I taught myself to juggle. I taught myself to swim. I was a person that pushed myself beyond limits. Like if me and my friends got together and to decide, let's see who can do the most push-ups, right? Even if I went first or last, I would make sure that I would go beyond where anybody could reach. And I know, and I had a feeling as a young person that most people in competition don't push themselves to their fullest. And some people do it, but most people don't. And if they're pushed, maybe they'll do it. But I did it of my own thing. I just liked to see where my limits were, And so that I find was a good attitude and helpful, because it made me know my strengths. It made me know my abilities. So from an early age, I knew I wasn't afraid of challenges. I embraced challenges, as a matter of fact. I was growing up close to the church. My mother the church would have outings with different congregations in different places, and I enjoyed that. It was usually held in the country, and the people would prepare different foods and so on. So I enjoyed my association with the church. But then, at that time, I hadn't read the Bible much. Then I picked up the Bible and started to read the Bible. And one of the things that struck me in the Old Testament, one of the stories that struck me is the story of the prophet Nuh, alayhi salam, wherein it says that the prophet Nuh got drunk, passed out in a cave, and his son found him in his cave and lifted up his tunic and saw his nakedness. So when I read that, I thought I questioned the veracity of the story, because it just didn't seem to me that could happen to a prophet, that he could get drunk, and that to the extent he passed out and his son would see his nakedness. In thinking about the story, even at that age, I thought, well, even if it was plausible to believe it, I thought that God would probably blind the son before he even saw his nakedness, because, it'd be something that would be scandalous, And so I had a problem with the Bible from my inception of reading it. Then I read the stories in the New Testament about the prophet Isa, alayhi salam, and Christians were claiming him to be God and the Son of God, and I found no evidence of him actually saying that. Then I read the book of Revelation, and I just couldn't understand it. And these were books that I read like several times, just to see if I missed something or I'm not understanding something. And at the end of it, I saw that they weren't actually scriptures. The Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the Bible, are accepted as the Injil in the original form, but the rest of them aren't actually scriptures. So within the short time of my reading the Bible, I came to the conclusion that I came to an understanding that its veracity was to be questioned, because the stories, I couldn't find justification or answers to the stories that I was reading, though I greatly admired the stories of the prophets. And what happened with that in me is that when I read of the prophets, their steadfastness, their their piety, their sacrifices, and those qualities that the prophets had, I actually was so impressed by them. I wanted to have these qualities myself. I like these qualities in people, and I like to have them, to acquire them myself. So I was conscious that when I grew up, I would be living a life on the divine path. I already had known that from 9, 10 years of age. When my mother left Guyana, however, my church-going days stopped. And my uncle, I was in the care of, did not send me to church, and I didn't go. I decided to go to New York and live with my uncles who were there studying. And that was no problem because we were a close family, and these were uncles that I grew up with. So after, I made one attempt first, and I came back after 3 months. My commitment got tested, and I found out that I wasn't as committed as I thought I was, and I came back. However, that determination to get a high school education dogged me. In particular, I wanted to emulate the academic success of my extended family members who all had achieved university education and so on. And they were teachers and professors and so on. So I wanted to emulate that, and I knew I had the ability to do it. So in spite of, by that time in Toronto, I was involved in some criminal activity as a young person. I also wasn't really endeared to that life, so I wanted to get out of that life also by having an education. So I went to New York, second time, and to pursue my high school diploma. When I came back to Toronto, with the help of some friends, we resuscitated a dormant Black youth organization called the Black Youth Organization. We had some meetings, but eventually it fizzed out because of lack of support. We had problems finding places to live, where when they saw us, they would promise us the place when we applied to rent a place, but once they saw us, they'd tell us, oh, we just rented the place. Jobs was the same thing, so we developed a way of, when we wanted a place to rent, we would have a Canadian sounding person call and get the place for us, and then we'd move in after. And that's how we got around that problem. From that, I went to University of Toronto. There was a program. Now, I had a grade 12 education, and the normal entrance requirement to the University of Toronto is a grade 13. But a program called the Transitional Year Program was initiated by some older brothers in the community who had pressed university to open its doors to people who normally wouldn't qualify for entrance. And in the second year, I was one of the students who applied and was accepted into that program. It's a 1-year pre-university program, and I applied and was accepted into it, and I entered the University in Toronto in that program, and then first year university the following year. I studied sociology and political science. By that time, or shortly into my academic career at the University of Toronto, I got married. Which was an ideal marriage. My wife developed postpartum depression. That was a big change in my life because it effectively made me a single father. We were parents already, and we had one child. And eventually it caused our separation initially because it just came out of the blue. This was a normal, healthy, young woman, who I never saw any signs of mental health issues. And 1 month after our first child, this chain of events started of postpartum depression, which eventually led to our separation. I eventually quit because the pressures of dealing with the postpartum depression, studying, doing exams, papers, and not knowing that it was postpartum depression. This was not something that I would know for years later. It was just an unknown mental illness for much of the time that we were married. The doctors didn't know what it was. The older women in the community didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. Nobody can tell us what it could have told us what it was. So when she got better, we resumed our marriage and relationship. 4 years passed, and we had another child. She fell into postpartum depression again. She got better. She eventually got better. And 5 years after that, we had another child. She had it again. And that last time she had it, and all the times that she had it, she was misdiagnosed and was given the wrong drugs. So even though she eventually got better and came off the medication, when she got another experience of this postpartum depression, she was misdiagnosed and misprescribed again. So in the end, she was never cured of it, and she never got better, and she passed away eventually. But the marriage died. It was during that time that I decided that I would not be working legitimate jobs, and I would resume a criminal career. And during that time, I was selling drugs. Not long after that, I started to use it, and it became a habit forming after that. Eventually, I remarried, and I went to Guyana and remarried, and I had a family there, and I brought them up, and I moved past the drugs, past the criminal life, and when I came back from New York, my name, because I was well known as a street person. I was very popular in our little world in Toronto at the time. And so my name got the ear of a Muslim brother from America. He had come over with those group of what they called draft dodgers who were resisting going into the American army and fled to Canada to avoid going to Vietnam. And he was from Philadelphia. And he came to Toronto, and my name got his ear, and he came visit me one day, said he heard about me, introduced himself as a Muslim. And he asked me if I ever heard about Islam. And I told him, well, the only thing I know is Muhammad Ali, because he was the biggest name of Islam, and Malcolm X, in my time. But before that, really, I'd never given consideration to Islam, even though Islam is the religion of some of the people in the country I was born in. It just wasn't there with me. But when he explained Islam to me, and everything about it sounded like what I wanted to hear of the divine religion, in that it sounded like the truth. Whereas compared to Christianity, I had so many things shouting out to me that this can't be true. So he asked me how I felt about it, and I said it sounded like the truth to me. He asked me if I wanted to embrace it, and I thought about it for a bit, and I reflected on what would be necessary of me to embrace the life. It would mean me leaving the life I was living, basically, and at the time I didn't want to do that. I was enjoying the life I was living, and I didn't want to do that because I wanted to commit to Islam if I took it up. And I didn't feel that my commitment would be strong enough to hold me there, and I didn't want to play around like that, especially with something that I was considering to be the truth at the time. So for the next several years, Islam would not be in my thoughts at all. In fact, when the moment of like a spiritual crisis overcame me, because what happened was that a point came in my life and among many youths in Toronto in their lives where there was like a spiritual rumblings among us. We grew up as Christians, all of us, but we wanted to walk the divine path in a way that we felt would be sanctioned by the Creator, at least. And most of us didn't know of Islam. None of us. We all came from Christian backgrounds. And at that time, the Rastafari movement was big in the black community. So that was an attraction for some of the youths. On the other hand, some brothers were coming from America and introducing Islam to the us youths in Toronto also. So there were two streams running the community there. There was the Rastafari movement and there was the Islamic movement. And those youths who had spiritual awakening or spiritual consciousness, for them it was, okay, which way do we go? So you found like maybe half the youths became Rasta men and women and half the youths went into Islam. For the first part, I remained aloof from either of them. When myself and my wife separated, I find myself being drawn to the Creator, being drawn to God, because the separation had affected me. Two things about it affected me. One was that I didn't know what the issue was, because all of a sudden she doesn't like me anymore. She doesn't want anything to do with me, my wife. You know, all of a sudden, I mean, like she woke up one morning and this is what's happening. And over the period of a year, it intensified. So when we broke up, it was like a shock to me. And then, you know, we were such an ideal marriage. I thought it would be a marriage that would last for life. So the breakup of my family really affected me. And I needed some spiritual counseling. And my mother, she used to read a Christian book from the Unity Church called Daily Word. It was a little pamphlet. And this book had things that, sayings that would help you have faith or believe in God or pray to Him and look for answers and so on. So I found that was helpful, right? Because I just needed some spiritual support, and I found it was helpful. As soon as I got over that period of all that, I put that down and I never went back to any religious article again. Then, also at the time of the Rastafarian movement, I started listening to that music, especially Bob Marley's music, and he spoke a lot about God. And also I listened to other artists who were having spiritual experiences, expressing spiritual experiences in their music. So, and at that time I was living the life of a bachelor, and I rented a place and I was by myself, so I was thinking a lot. At home by myself a lot, thinking a lot, pondering where I want to go with myself spiritually. Shortly after that, I embraced the Rastafari culture. Listening to the music of Bob Marley and artists like Earth, Wind and Fire, who were the main artists that I listened to because of the spiritual nature of their music, inspired me to seek the divine path. And without looking here or there, I walked towards the Rastafari movement. I was going fine with that for a while, but I increasingly kept hearing some brothers referring to Haile Selassie, which was emperor in Ethiopia, as God or the Son of God. And if it's one thing that I couldn't accept from the time I knew about God or accepted God, was that no man could be God. And but I played it off as if, well, that's his personal belief. I went even further in this because I was sure that this was a divine path, because when I did my research for the movement, it brought me to the Old Testament and the messenger Samson, who was a Nazarene. The Nazarenes were people who did not cut their hair, and you know, this is where the Rastafari movement roots, biblical roots, originate. So from my point of view, I was on a divine path because it had biblical verification. I started to attend the Ethiopian Orthodox Church because I wanted to separate myself from those other people who were corrupted with some other form of this movement. And so I started to attend the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But then I realized that I'm a Christian, because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a Christian organization. So at that point, I began to question myself as what it is that I really wanted, you know? And is this what I wanted? And I remember one night, after about maybe 5, 6 years in the Rastafari movement, I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror and I looked at myself. And I looked at my hair and everything. And I said to myself, the way of life that you want is something that you will hold for the rest of your life. Does this meet that criteria? Is this something that you could live the rest of your life being sure that it's the truth? And I had doubts. In fact, it was beyond doubts. I didn't think that this was the truth at that point. By that time, another brother had came to my place and spoke to me about Islam in a beautiful way, simple but beautiful. And with that in my recent memory and the questions I'm having now and the brother that I met, I said to myself, you know what? I'm going down there tomorrow and find out what it takes to be a Muslim, and I'm going to embrace Islam. And the next day, I went to the brother's house, and there was a group of brothers there who had preceded me in embracing Islam, about 7 of them. And in front of them, I embraced Islam. I didn't do any research. I already had 2 encounters with Islam before that had me have this feeling that I'm on solid ground as far as the truthfulness is concerned of Islam. So, and in fact, in the Sunni schools, there just wasn't that many things that you could do research on other than maybe Rasulullah's life, you know. There wasn't that much literature, and I was satisfied that I was on the right path. There was only one time that one brother mentioned to me, if anybody asks you what school you were in, say Sunni school. But for the most part, our group were not a people that identified with Sunni Shia. We were just people who had hunger for the truth and the way of Allah, who we called God at the time, right, before we were Muslims. So we were just hungry for that. And if something presented itself like that to us, we would have gone. Fortunately, nothing else presented itself like that to us except Sunni Islam at the time. And so we embraced that. But there were 2 brothers among us who were of Shia Islam. They never pressed us about it, and they just left us alone. And they would come around us from time to time. And we were all comfortable with who we are. It so happened that some years later, that we called it a Jamaat. There was a group of us in our families. Our little Jamaat broke up. And the place of congregation moved from where it was to my home. My home was convenient because by that time, my marriage had fallen apart and I had custody of the 3 children from that marriage. And so I was just like a single father. So it was convenient to go there, right? So you wouldn't be disturbing a family as such, right? Just me and my children. And while in that experience, one of the brothers of the 2 brothers who were of the Shia school, he needed a place to stay. And being open-minded as we were, fine, come stay by my place. Came to stay by my place. And he brought his books. One day, he introduced us to the books. And we were cool. We never had a Sunni Shia thing at all. So yeah, let's see the books. We were never gotten that close to Shia Islam at the time. From the moment we read the books, that's it. We were like the domino, all of us. All of us, one by one, embraced the Shia school. All of us. So now there were 3 brothers who were hardcore in their beliefs, and they stayed in the Sunni school. But out of the maybe 9, 10 of us, 7 of us embraced that school, and we are to this day. I remember the books that impressed me where I read a book like Ali the Magnificent, Hussein the Savior of Islam. I mean, those books, I didn't even want to go to sleep. You know, we held on, we were staying up late at night in discussion. We couldn't believe what we were reading. Everything made sense because we found it, we knew something was missing. Because when we were in the Sunni school, we found that, okay, we read the rightly guided caliphs. And that was the extent of literature. We had a book by Sayyid Qutb. And that was the extent of our literature. So we were thirsty, like this is all there is. Like just make salat and fast and eat halal food. That was our Islam, you know. And so when the world of Shia Islam moves us, it's all these things about the prophets, the 12 imams, and all the people of his household and all the literature. It was unbelievable to us, and so we became ferocious readers. We got in touch with the brother Musawi, who is related to one of the 70 Imam, and he had a whole library. We tore him up, right? Ate up his books. We were by him every few days, and he was giving us the books. Then he told us about the Bayview mosque, right? We started going to that mosque. And on the basement of that mosque, they had books by the P. Ibrahim Muhammad Trust, Truth, Light, and Knowledge. We were floored. We were reading everything we could get our hand on, you know, because, you know, this is knowledge, right? And it's things we didn't know. We found it like we were misled. People were keeping things from us. Next thing you know, we started taking the information to the Sunni masjid, and little did we know, and Jami Mosque, and you know, the people were like, we thought we were just, hey, do you know of this, right? And people would be like us, you know, but they were like, well, we can't deal with that stuff, and don't circulate that stuff here too much because you know, it'd be trouble, you know. And so we eventually, you know, coalesced among our own selves, and we continued that existence. Today, I am a semi-retired teacher in Ottawa, and I am looking to launch another career, public speaking about my life, in any fora or to any group of people that are willing to hear me speak. And particularly, I think I can speak about challenges and overcoming them and addressing them, and even postpartum depression. I had a lot of experience with that, and my daughter also suffers from it, his sister, my son's sister, and she also has lost a lot too, right? And we didn't even know that she was suffering from it, so it passed by us like that. So I want to start, I've written my autobiography, and I've written 3 children's books. I'm looking for a publisher for the children's books right now. They're in the hands of an editor. My autobiography is a more longer way off in terms of publishing because though I've completed writing it with pen, my typing is slow, so I'm not getting good progress in that on my laptop, but I'm working on it. So hopefully the community and people will be seeing more of me as the days go by. Unquestionably, finding Shia Islam has been the greatest thing that happened to my life, because I grew up always wanting to walk on the divine path and not knowing what the divine path was. And Allah has brought me through Christianity, the Afrocentric ideology, Rastafari, Sunni Islam, and to Shia Islam. I can only think that Allah wanted to guide me, right, and to fulfill my dreams and have my dreams fulfilled by taking me through all these steps, because Allah could have left me alone. He could have guided me to Rastafari and left me there. He could have guided me to Sunni Islam and closed me off, right? But He guided me to this. So I think that Allah has shown that He has blessed me and that He likes me. And so it's my determination to have Allah be pleased with me and to be pleased with Allah, His Prophet, His Al, and His religion.